In November 2015, a landslide election victory for Nobel Peace Laureate Aung San Suu Kyi and her NLD party seemed to signal a new era of freedom and democracy for Myanmar. The military junta would be put back in its box, ethnic conflicts would be resolved, the much oppressed Rohingya Muslims would have their rights protected. But it hasn't turned out that way, with violence now on the rise. So has Aung San Suu Kyi betrayed the principles she once stood for, or is she being held to an unfair standard? Joining me to discuss this in the arena are Maung Zarni, Burmese author and scholar, and Jose Ramos-Horta, former president of East Timor and a Nobel Peace Prize winner himself. Thank you both for joining me on Upfront, gentlemen. Maung Zarni, let me begin with you. Aung San Suu Kyi is getting heavily criticised these days by the UN, by human rights groups, by the Pope and the Dalai Lama even, for not doing enough to protect democracy, human rights, minority rights in Myanmar. How did she go from Nobel Peace Prize winner and a former political prisoner herself to being this target of growing global criticism?
Well, there seems to be like two different Aung San Suu Kyi here. One, that the international community consider a defender of human rights, minority rights, and against oppression, for which she won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1991. And then the other is a politician, in which she insists that she has always been an opposition leader of opposition party NLD and never been a human rights defender. And so I think there is a reality, Aung San Suu Kyi, the real Aung San Suu Kyi, and the icon that has been manufactured but through the media and the international community. And so that is a major fundamental conflict at work here.
Jose Ramos-Horta, Maung Zarni says there are two Aung San Suu Kyis, the manufactured icon and the very real politician who isn't a human rights defender. What's your response to that?
Suu Kyi inherit an extraordinarily difficult situation, very complex, delicate. She has to deal with the military who still have enormous power. She inherits a very fractured society with more than 18 armed insurgencies, ethnic groups, and this is a very difficult transition from military dictatorship to democracy. For her to survive in this context, she has to try to work with the military. She cannot antagonize them. She cannot antagonize the hardliners, ethno-nationalists, Buddhists, monks, and others. So it's an extraordinarily difficult situation for her.
So you're basically saying give her a chance, give her time.
Yes, exactly. My point is give her a chance. We have to understand her difficulties. Criticisms are welcome, criticisms are necessary, but sometimes the criticism probably is misdirected more to her than to the military.
Maung Zarni, what about Jose Ramos-Horta's point that the military is still wielding huge power? Critics of Aung San Suu Kyi, do they recognize the fact that she doesn't control the Interior Ministry, the Defense Ministry, the Border Ministry? Aren't you being unfair to her when you don't recognize the limits of her power?
We know that Aung San Suu Kyi does not control the armed forces, but in this situation of the national persecution of Rohingya Muslims, the military is not the only institution that is involved. She controls 4 other ministries that are directly involved in dismissing, denying, and legitimizing the persecution of the Rohingyas. Information Ministry, Religious Affairs Ministry, Immigration Ministry, Foreign Affairs Ministry, of which Aung San Suu Kyi is the minister, and finally, the office of the Myanmar State Councillor, which is Aung San Suu Kyi. All those 5 ministries that she has direct control over are directly involved in this process of national persecution of Rohingya.
Let me put that point to Jose Ramos-Horta. Maung Zarni has a point, doesn't he, that she may not control the military directly, but she is the de facto president of the country. She is the foreign minister. She does control huge amounts of information. She has huge legitimacy, and she's not speaking out against the dehumanization of the Rohingya. In fact, she's contributing to it. Her official website talked about fake rape in Rakhine State. When the UN talked about gang rape of Rohingya Muslims, her website put out a statement saying these are all fake rapes. She's denied there's ethnic cleansing. She's called it Muslim-on-Muslim violence. She's played a huge role, hasn't she, in dehumanizing them?
First, let me say, I have written, I have a co-author, I have spoken on the persecution of the Rohingya. So my record on that is absolutely clear. It's an abominable situation. Kofi Annan, at the invitation of the Myanmar government, at the invitation of Suu Kyi, came to Myanmar on a number of occasions and the region, produced a report and a set of recommendations. According to Kofi Annan, Suu Kyi has responded very positively, and we must give them a chance.
With respect, Jose Ramos-Horta, you didn't actually answer my question, which is that when her website says fake rape, isn't that outrageous that Aung San Suu Kyi's own official website is saying it's all fake rape in Rakhine, despite what the UN says?
Well, I haven't seen the website. I don't go around reading the website of the Myanmar government. And
okay, but on the wider point,
saying,
she is the foreign minister and de facto president. Surely she could be speaking out more rather than constantly denying that there are crimes against the Rohingya. Surely you agree with that?
Let me say again, she's handling a very complex, delicate situation. Any false step by Suu Kyi will be used by her enemies, her adversaries in Myanmar, those who do not wish the transition to democracy, those who do not wish to see democracy succeeding in Myanmar.
Maung Zarni, Jose Ramos-Horta says it's a very complex situation. You can't risk undermining democracy if she says the wrong thing or does the wrong thing, given the pressure on her. Are you risking her falling from power? Is that what you want to see?
No, I think, you know what? I have supported Aung San Suu Kyi for 15 years as an activist foot soldier. You know, of course, like the last thing, someone like myself, like who was inspired by her initially, will want to see is Aung San Suu Kyi fail. But the problem is, there has to be a line that we draw as a human rights community and simply human community as a Burmese society, where over 1 million people are being subject to genocide, and then at their expense, we say, let's keep the transition going, let's keep the military happy, and let's be
but just to be clear, Maung Zarni, just to be clear, Maung Zarni, you want to see her continue as president. You're not asking for her to step down. You don't think it was better to go back to the way it was, where it was a full military rule?
No, absolutely not. I've been in exile for almost 30 years, and it's in my vested personal interest that this transition process succeed, because my old mother, almost 80, is there, and unless democratization succeeds, I will never be able to see her or at her funerals. And so I think what I'm arguing, not simply as an activist or a scholar, I'm saying as a Burmese and a Buddhist at that, we cannot have a transition in the midst of a genocide, and also if we include other ethnic minorities, we have a civil war, very active civil war against the Kachin and other minorities in the Chinese-Burmese border area.
So what should she do? What one thing should she do that she's not doing?
Well, she has to, face up to the reality and the factual truth that the Rohingyas are, or they have always been, a part of Burma.
Jose Ramos-Horta, please.
First, I would advise my brothers and sisters, the Rohingya community, in Myanmar or abroad, do not use violence. Do not respond violence with violence. I advise Suu Kyi to persist in engaging in dialogue with the Rohingya leaders, those inside the country, with the Muslims in general in Myanmar. Bring them to the dialogue. Talk with the military. And I would advise also the international community to direct the pressure where it should be, and that is at the military and the hardliner Buddhist monks in Myanmar who have been consistently behind instigating the anti-Rohingya, anti-Muslim sentiment.
Jose Ramos-Horta, Aung San Suu Kyi is the first person to deny what the UN is saying, and yet you won't criticize her for that. You haven't criticized her once for saying there's no ethnic cleansing, there's no human rights abuses, there's no rape against the Rohingya.
No, I'm saying, Kofi Annan got reaction from Suu Kyi stating her response to their recommendation, Kofi Annan's commission recommendation, was very positive. We wait for the implementation of the recommendations made by the Kofi Annan's investigation and commission.
Maung Zarni, let me ask you this before we run out of time. Do you think history, you said you've known her for years, you supported her for years. Do you think historians will look back and remember Aung San Suu Kyi as the Nobel Peace Prize winning dissident, political prisoner, democracy, activist and opposition leader? Or will they remember her as a political leader who stood by as thousands of innocent people were killed on her watch? How will history remember her?
Well, in a word, she will be remembered as a genocide denier. She is not simply standing by when thousands of people are driven out of the country. She is actually culpable. She is aiding and abetting wittingly out of her anti-Muslim racism.
Jose Ramos-Horta, do you believe Aung San Suu Kyi has 4 years left of her term? If things carry on like they are now, where the violence is getting worse and worse, do you think, how will history remember your fellow Nobel laureate? In a good way or a bad way?
History is not done and evaluated in the course of 1 year period. It takes much, much longer. Suu Kyi has to continue to work very firmly with the military, with the security forces, to put an end to the violence on Rohingya people.
Gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you for joining me on UpFront. That's our show. UpFront will be back next week.